thought I would finally sit down and do a bit of a grade tutorial or breakdown on how I grade some of my driving footage. Let's jump right in. Alright, so looking at this video, if I can just go to a clip here with decent exposure. This is shooting with a ND filter. So this is probably a 90-degree shutter, so 1/100. And because it's sunny, I would probably have the ISO at its lowest setting, which I think is 100. So here you kind of get an idea of what this stuff looks like right out of camera. I can just overlay what my sort of final look was for this. Yeah, so if you jump in here, let's actually find a driving clip. It's a bit more interesting, isn't it? So that's without anything. Kind of see the car interior is pretty toast. I shot this with pretty low exposure. It's a very dynamic scene. Like the inside of the car ends up being quite dark, and the sky in the back there can end up being really, really bright. So this is quite tricky to do. You kind of get your first hint of a couple of the things I'm doing here. So let's look at this frame. I think if I go into the color page, I've disabled everything here for the minute. A lot of the heavy lifting here is what's it called, Filmbox and LensNode. So I can kind of show you if I just enable and disable LensNode. So that's with it applied, that's with it gone. It's pretty subtle, but it's doing quite a lot of like softening and stuff, and like a little bit of distortion. So what I like to do is I have that sort of as my base, and then in my next node I'll have Filmbox. So that's with just LensNode and Filmbox. So that's Filmbox on and off. Looks like I've pushed the exposure one stop, and color tone is 250D. The grain is a 35mm grain, the 200T one. I have a tiny bit of elation. And then in the color, it doesn't seem like I've done anything there. Normally I go to this lab section. Yeah, so I've neutralized the color fully, which just makes it look a bit more natural. Turn the richness up a bit, vibrance up a tiny bit. I treat the DJI footage like sort of flat desaturated Rec 709. I don't treat it like log. So I don't do any color space transforms or anything. So you can just see I've turned the density of the color up quite a bit. Especially I find that looks quite cool in the
car's taillights,
like more dense, and then a tiny bit more contrast. As I said, I don't do color space transforms. The very next, I'll show you. I've done a slightly weird thing this time around, but I'll get back to that. One of the biggest things I'm doing on a lot of this stuff is, and I'll toggle full screen, it'll be quite obvious. I add like a gradient mask to the bottom of the frame, like in this section, because I'm really only looking around, looking up and down a tiny bit. You don't even need to track it, and it looks kind of quite natural. Just gives you this like, I don't know, more. This won't play back, I don't think. Yeah, but you get to see some of the fun detail in the car. I mean, you can tell it's getting like pretty noisy, but in motion it doesn't matter too much. I like to add this thing in Resolve called Texture Pop, which I have doing just the tiniest bit of sort of like almost HDR-y kind of lift in the highlights, and like just gives the grain that extra little bit of bite, which I really like. And then some contrast pop, which I can kind of describe in the same way. Like if you look over there on the sort of like license plate area, if I toggle that on and off, you get like quite a nice bit of extra crunch there. Cool. So this color space transform, I've done something totally broken that you're not really supposed to do, but I'm taking Rec 709 back to log C4, which is a relog for the Lex 35, which looks like that. Just because there's a slot I like from the iRelook library. I can show you guys what that is, but I have it blended in here at like half intensity. And then I'm just rocking this back to Rec 709. I can kind of show you what that's doing. So from there, it's kind of just adding this sort of cream and green thing back in there, making everything feel a bit more earthy. I could absolutely have just created this in manually, but I don't know. I sometimes like doing the wrong thing and just being experimental and having fun. So okay, so these clips, these are the raw clips from my. I think the video is called like Blue Hour North Course or something. Some of my favorite footage I've gotten of drifting. So you can see the kind of source footage looks quite good, and the exposures are all kind of in a happy range. One thing you can notice here compared to the other clips we looked at is that my head is moving around a lot. That's because Rocksteady is enabled on the camera, and I wasn't using the correct shutter angle here. It's not terrible, but you can see that the steering wheel looks a little bit staccato. And then I think like in this clip, if you look at the rear wheel, if you can see it, not really. Maybe in the last corner you can see it, but yeah, the motion's kind of a little bit too sharp. So what I do, yeah, there you can kind of tell when it looks weird like that. So what I've done here is there's a plugin for Fusion. Is that what it's called? Yeah, Fusion. Called Real Smart Motion Blur. I'm sure you could do something similar with the tools inside of Resolve, but I have this. So I'm going to use it. So basically, yeah, I normally just apply it to the clip and then make sure that the GPU is enabled. And I'm going to take that off because I've pre-rendered this. It ends up looking like this. So you can kind of look the car in the background. It's like artificially creating a bit of more natural motion blur. I don't have the grade, the file for this anymore. I kind of just let rip. But let me get stuck in and see what we can cook up here and how I would sort of approach this normally. So this is probably quite a good frame to look at. So LensNode, drop that on that first node. I think originally when I did this, I graded it a lot more heavy-handed than the stuff I've done more recently. Like in this case, I might turn the f-stop sharpener up a bit and maybe turn the master blend down. Yeah, so it's just doing something a little bit more subtle. I'm not even going to mess with looking at all the different lenses and stuff we can look at there. Then adding a bit of Filmbox. Tell it that I'm working in Rec 709 and that the footage is not anything wacky. So that's the default Filmbox look, which I think already looks pretty banging, to be honest. So I'm going to keep that for now. Maybe what we'll do is we'll go back into the lab here, which I spoke about, see what neutralize does. Yeah, maybe just crank it. Turn the richness up a bit. Oh yeah, I like that. And density a tiny bit. Contrast for this might actually keep down a tiny bit. And then I think what's going to be really important for this one is, like I mentioned earlier, adding a serial, like adding a gradient to the interior of the car. So I just do like a little circly guy. Let's not worry about the shape of that too much. And then I go into my HDR wheels. I just say it's Rec 709. And then do like a one-stop lift on the interior. So that's just doing that for us. I think I had like a 16 mil grain on the other version of this. Yeah, yeah, let's go with that. A bit more grungy. And then texture pop and contrast pop are my most abused tools. Don't really know what my ideal settings for this would be, but that feels pretty good. I find sometimes it can look a little bit heavy-handed inside Resolve, but by the time it's gone through like compression when you render it and then compression once you upload it, it kind of ends up looking okay. And then we're going to add contrast pop as well. So you can totally mess with doing this before the grain. But I do find, I mean, this is maybe a little bit heavy-handed, but it kind of makes the grain feel like embedded in the footage. I might even sometimes mess with a bit of sharpening on top of all of this. That is obviously way too much. 4.2, and then might turn this texture pop down a tiny bit as well. So let's say I think inside Filmbox I would come into grain and turn the 16mm grain down a bit. Obviously, all of these plug nodes are like pretty heavy to run on a system like mine. That's with LensNode disabled. Kind of how LensNode just gives it that sort of like big camera feeling. I recall I did something wacky as well with like lens reflections or something. Oh, yeah. Last time I did this, I had like some of these things going on, and then I think I just made it maybe white. Interesting. I mean, for sure, that's too heavy. Maybe there's a saturation slider somewhere. But yeah, I was just having fun, like playing around with stuff. Looks kind of cyberpunky and crazy. I don't love it looking super blue like this. I don't know why. Ah, global colorize. There it is. Yeah. So it was something like that. Looks kind of crazy, but there we go. That way. Yeah. Might have left a tiny bit of blue in. And I think I actually put it inside the car interior. But yeah, that's basically all there is to it. As you can tell, I love nerding out on this shit and love sharing this driving footage. So if you have any other questions about that, I would love to talk about it. Yeah, I will say, like, it's one of those things. I think it's often difficult to discern like where the grade ends and where the footage begins, if that makes sense. Like, really great footage is easy to grade, and then that's not me like blowing my own horn about the footage. It's just, a really beautiful scene like that session at Blue Hour is always going to be really easy to grade. It's not an awful lot you need to do to make that look cool because it looked cool. That's about all I have to say about that. I hope that was somewhat useful.